2. And we're off to the races. Everybody, welcome to the April FITSNews month in review. You you might notice that I am not our fearless leader, Will Folks, and that's because there's been a new addition to the Folks family this week. Frederick Charles Fritz Folks, weighing in at 8 pounds, 9 ounces, has joined the Fitz crew. But that's meant that we have been running the ship of state here over at FITSNews this week.
He is adorable. If you haven't seen pictures, check. Will has tweeted them. He is teeny tiny and perfect, perfectly
As
round.
many have said, clearly that the child takes after Katrina.
Thank God. But yeah, we are driving the ship. Well, we'll take some time with this family, and we are happy to do so. But it has been quite a month in April, huh?
Yeah, there's been a lot of news between Bowen Turner getting rearrested, although that didn't happen this month. We got back the FOIA response that you sent in asking for video of the incident. We got to see what a professional response the state trooper that handled that gave. But it also gave us, of course, a lot of insight into who he is. We finally got to publish our report that you and Callie Lyons have been working on for about a quarter of a year at this point, related to the untimely death of Jeffrey Hammond and Jeffrey Hammond, and what might have led to that. And of course, we've had dead bodies cropping up, or people, zip tied and bound across the Lowcountry. Andy Fancher's been covering those stories, whether they're related or not, remains to be seen. But he's going to be joining us later on in this show to discuss that. And there've been other stories which we're going to hope to hit on here in this live stream. But first up is Hammond, and we are joined by Callie Lyons, who was the driver behind our reporting on this. Jennifer and Callie, would you like to explain to members of our audience who might not be familiar with this story why the death of Jeffrey Hammond is suspicious?
Absolutely. I'm going to let Callie take the lead on this because,
Today.
well, I was helpful. Callie really drove this story, and she did so much work on this. I'm so proud and happy that she let me help her. So, Callie, do you want to give us a little backstory on Jeffrey Hammond? And don't forget, if you have questions while we're going, throw them in the chat, and I will make sure we get to them while we're talking.
Certain Hammonds died and on so
Is Callie breaking up for you, Dylan?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, she's
did
down
not
in she's
Hey.
down in the holler,
But
and I think her
yeah, I'm
Wi-Fi is questionable. So I will take over. Jeffrey Hammond
suspicious was no
was a entrepreneur down in Beaufort County. He was a multi-million dollar he had multi-million dollar company that he founded. He authored an espionage novel. He was a graduate of the Citadel, and in 2017 he died at his home in Bluffton, his beautiful home. And Callie did a deep dive into his death and all of the questions surrounding it that have yet to be answered. So Jeffrey Hammond, he very accomplished man. He ran, he had the publisher of a magazine in Florida called International Opulence, and he ran a company called Consolidated Services Incorporation, which was a Florida-based facility management company. So their main home was based in Boca Raton, Florida, and their secondary home was in Bluffton. And on June 14th in 2017, his wife, Jane Hammond, called 911 and said that she had found her husband collapsed on the floor of their upstairs office in their beautiful Bluffton home. She told police that she was the only person there. She was not able to roll him over to administer CPR. They arrived shortly after the phone call and began life-saving measures. And after communicating with the hospital, they determined that he was deceased and ceased those measures. But there are a lot of questions in the aftermath of his death. He had gone to the doctor Shortly before June 14th, shortly before he died, the doctor gave him a clean bill of health. I mean, we're talking weeks before he died. And the doctor, we're going to do a follow up story on this doctor because he's really interesting. His doctor is Dr. Gaston Perez, and he's based out of Beaufort County. But doctor gave him a clean bill of health, and he collapsed, and just they took him to the hospital. Coroner ordered a autopsy at MUSC. The autopsy report came back. The cause was listed pending toxicology. Autopsy Mander was cited as pending, but it looks like at the end, the ME determined that his death was a result of, the natural causes, cardiac arrest, which did not jibe with what his doctor said. He was healthy. He had, clean bill of health. So, but in all of these ambulance reports, the police departments arriving, all the first responders report, there's no mention of a giant gash in his head. Now, this gash was like 4 inches long. And the first time that we saw any mention of this was in the autopsy report. And friends that saw it, so, Jane Hammond, his wife, had his body moved to Florida to have the burial there. And friends who went to the funeral service, they had an open casket, and friends who saw it said it was the size and shape of a golf club iron. It was very obvious. It wasn't something that you would miss when responding to a scene. And yet there was no attempt by any first responder, medical examiner, investigator to determine if that wound played any part in his death. So it was really interesting. So, I mean, the story is just bizarre, Dylan. I mean, we get into his wife's actions after his death, and they were bizarre. The day before, she posted this day before he died, cryptic Facebook message about losing someone. That message the next day ends up on his funeral announcement. She had him, who he was a lifelong Catholic, had him buried in a Jewish cemetery, and her personal jeweler planned the cemetery, or planned the funeral. So it was, I mean, just so many bizarre things. And then her Jeff's daughter, his only daughter, started asking questions and was not getting answers. She wanted, his medical records. She just wanted to understand what had happened to her father. And she kept getting denied over and over and over again. So she hired a private investigator out of Los Angeles that she saw on a episode of Dateline named Joseph DeLue. And he did his investigative report is what, a lot of what we based our investigation on. So, I mean, it is a thorough investigation that uncovered, forgery, fraud, just like a number of actions in the immediate aftermath of Jeff's death by his wife and his, adopted son, his wife's son, who he adopted, that were just so questionable and would make any investigator, to me, want to take a second look at this death.
Yeah, and you mentioned some stuff that people were asking us about in comments, like how does a jeweler become a funeral director? This is what somebody left under the big YouTube report. That alone should have made people question that, and Jeff being buried in rags. I can't believe none of his friends asked any questions. Well, actually, one of his friends did. Actually, multiple of his friends kind of were very suspicious about the circumstances. One of which was the person who encouraged uh, members of his family to go to the media.
Yeah, and one of his landscaper in Beaufort and Bluffton ended up being a close friend. He spoke to police and had multiple questions about what happened, and the funeral. I mean, just it was all just so bizarre, and the private investigator Joseph DeLue did go to Beaufort County Sheriff's Office with this huge, binders and binders of reports, supporting evidence. I mean, he built this case and just said, you've got to look at this. And they determined that the crimes were not in their jurisdiction because most of the evidence of fraud and forgery and all of the financial transactions happened in Florida. So, you know, they determined that that wasn't in their jurisdiction and they closed the investigation.
Well, it should be noted that Joe comes on the scene years after they closed the homicide investigation, which they closed before they even got the report from the medical examiner. I mean, I understand, you see an older guy died not obviously with foul play. Uh, the first thing you're thinking is probably not murder. But when you look at some of the larger circumstances, such as the numerous financial crimes which Joe has, as you say, uh, put forth a lot of evidence of, you look at the context of a lot of people familiar with the situation say that he was preparing to ask his wife to divorce him. You look at the fact that her uh, biological son, correct me if I'm wrong here, who is from a previous relationship, who Jeffrey married, hired at his company, fired. Well, what position does he end up with shortly after Jeffrey's death? He's running Jeffrey's company that he built. And a lot of people that knew him said that this was just something that, given his past sexual harassment complaints, which resulted in him being fired, was obviously something that he would never let him do. You look at the fact that his house was sold for far less than it was worth to this uh, suspicious jewelry dealer who also arranged his funeral, which of course didn't comport with his religious values at all, because he was Catholic and buried in a Jewish cemetery, and he was buried wearing rags when he was a man worth tens of millions of dollars, who of course dressed very nice his whole life. There was just a lot of red flags left and right here, and unfortunately BCSO seems to not take this case as a potential murder when they initially investigated it. Now, when there's tens of millions of dollars on the line, and very well connected people involved in a case, you of course have to wonder, did they make an honest mistake? Were there other factors at play? That's something that of course we hope to get to in the future as we continue driving down this road. But there are a lot of signs here, and obviously we've touched on a lot of things that are strange, but Callie's report that we published is one of the longest pieces I've ever seen published on FITSNews. I think it is the longest piece, period, that I've ever seen published on our website. And that's because there are just reams of strange things that just don't happen usually when somebody dies of natural causes.
Right. And, Beaufort County, I understand, not every death that is suspicious warrants an investigation, but when you look at the totality of the circumstances, there are a lot of questionable things that happened in Florida that gives them a motive to maybe look at this death more seriously, to look at the circumstances. And in the investigative report that Delu did, he mentioned that Jane said clearly in the 911 call that her and Jeff were the only ones in the house, yet you can hear a second voice there. And then you look at the house plans, there are hidden tunnels and rooms throughout this house, including at the office, where if there was a second person there, they could have easily hidden while police responded. I mean, there's just a lot of things in this death that do not make sense.
Yeah, that's of course one really important red flag. I initially listened to the 911 call and thought, okay, this is not weird. The dispatcher's sitting in the whatever room they have her in, and clearly there's a man in the room with her. Well, if you listen to Joe DeLue, apparently they backtracked, went through their personnel logs. There was not a male in the room with the dispatcher at the time. Well, which is really strange because you hear a male multiple times throughout the recording of the 911 call. And it makes sense if Jane Hammond, his former wife, was to be participating in something that resulted in his death. It's pretty unlikely that a little old lady would be able to physically overpower Mr. Hammond, who was in good shape for his age.
Yeah, and she wasn't physically healthy. She had a lot of health issues. So I do think if she were to do it and had motive, it would have been likely that she would have had help. I mean, just the sale of the home alone, the undervaluing of it, right there, it was to avoid taxes, and that's a federal crime. And no, they can't get anybody to look at what they found in it. I mean, it's evident, it's clear, it's right in front of you in paper. It's just the most bizarre thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, I do think that if there's going to be justice here, the best course of action would be either, hoping that there's a new sheriff in town, quite literally in South Carolina, because we obviously elect our sheriffs. So, perhaps there can be a change of leadership who changes how they approach this, or the feds getting involved. As you say, there are multiple federal nexuses, or at the very least, a federal investigation. The problem is there are limited federal resources, and they're very, choosy about what rabbit holes they go down. As we are here at FITSNews, there's only so much time in the day, and we get a lot of stuff put before us. So I understand that, but getting a federal investigative agency interested is certainly easier said than done.
Yeah. SC Nana asked if the daughter has taken legal action against the estate. There was, in probate court, there was a battle in Florida. I don't believe that the daughter prevailed. I believe his wife Jane won that probate battle, but I don't know that for Jeff's daughter that it's not about the money. It's about finding out what happened to her dad. She just wants answers, and things just didn't add up to her, and she pursued an independent investigation. And I mean, I've worked in private investigation. I've worked for some of the best investigators I've ever seen, and this was by far the most extensive and thorough investigation I've ever been able to look through. It was fascinating.
Yeah, and hopefully we can. We're not the only ones reporting on this, and I know that there's interest about this story from some of the folks who do have the power to blow stories up over in the national media. You know, I think with some of the more of this stuff in the public eye, there's a chance that it goes that route. And as we've seen through stories like the Murdaugh murder saga, once national media gets involved, things can escalate very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, kudos to Callie for her work on this. I mean, even though the investigation was thorough, we always have to go through everything and fact check it and make sure, everything aligns with what, people are giving us. And, that was a monumental task. I mean, it was involved, property records in Florida. It involved, getting records from various law enforcement agencies in South Carolina, which is not always the easiest task. So yeah, I mean, just phenomenal work by Callie. The video that you did was amazing, and I know Will editing. I mean, people don't know this, but Will's editing process is extensive as well, and he goes through and fact checks everything as well. And so I mean, this was really just a really great team effort by everybody. Oh, Andy.
And
Well, howdy.
We're joined by Andrew Fancher.
Appears I
How
joined
are
a little
you?
too early. I was
No,
testing out some
no.
of the tech, and just like that, I'm here.
I am
Right on
glad you're
time.
here. Yeah, we are kind of wrapping up the Hammond conversation and ready to talk about the women in the low country.
Yes, the women winding up in various places. Yeah, if you're ready, we could just hop right into just some of the notes we've been taking, some of the coverage that we have been conducting on these absurd, almost anomaly cases, but all at the same time. You know, we've got the April 3rd woman winding up on a boat landing in Jasper County. We've got the April 10th woman winding up decomposing in a suitcase. And then we've got the April 12th woman winding up dead in a trash can in Columbia. There were, of course, crime and journalistic junkies that hoping all of these were connected. Based off of information that we have received, it does not appear as though that is the case. How unfortunate, but nonetheless, I am down and interested to to break down all of these as we see fit with what few pictures I was able to print from two of our wonderful printers here in the office that don't work if your name's Andrew Fancher. But there's where we are at the moment.
So do you want to start? I mean, I think the Jasper County, the woman at the boat landing, to me was, I mean, if we start with that, I thought it was fascinating, just watching this unfold, because they really kept this investigation close to the chest. It was hard to get information. We were getting information from sources, but not able to get law enforcement to verify it. And, you know, we don't want to, you know, unless we have some sort of law enforcement verification, can't
Right.
roll with it. But, you know, you really were dogged in pursuing information from law enforcement.
Absolutely. And you talk about the difficulty of running with something without that law enforcement confirmation. I mean, hell, the Jasper County Sheriff's Office didn't even confirm that the incident had happened. We got reports that there was a major law enforcement presence, and the Facebook warriors pretty much hit the nail on the head as to what happened. But we had put out that preliminary story just saying that people were present. There appears to have been something happening. And then the following morning, JCSO confirms that there was a woman bound at this terminus of Corner Lake Road in a very remote corner of Jasper County, leading to the Coosawhatchee River. And that is essentially what we had at that time. As you said, they kept it very close to the chest. And much later, we realized that they knew a lot more about the investigation than we had originally been led on to believe. Fortunately, according to investigators, they had identified this woman who, according to our sources, was zip tied at the hands and ankles, left half naked in this grassy patch adjacent to, again, a very remote swamp addled with alligators and wildlife and what
And
have you.
she was alive, but very, very badly injured.
Yeah, exact quotes. Yeah, badly beaten.
Yeah.
In fact, we received some word that she may have had a tracheotomy due to those injuries. But yeah, they identified her the following day, and just out of respect for the victim, they did not release her identity. But as we come to find out later from SLED, it appears as though the suspects were in iron sight by that afternoon. So Barnwell County Sheriff's Office issues 3 arrest warrants for kidnapping related to this incident within the day that law enforcement was called. And trail goes cold until Highway Patrol pulls over, and Adrienne Ginn, which I was fortunate enough to print off this lucky woman's picture. We have Adrienne Ginn here with a cheetah zebra concoction here. But Adrienne Ginn, 31, was arrested by Highway Patrol for an outstanding bench warrant unrelated to this arrest. And she remains on hold, I believe, in Hampton for this kidnapping charge. Right. And, you know, within hours of her arrest, because, you know, we still have 2 additional suspects. Within hours of her arrest, we've got the JCSO and Hampton County Sheriff's Office requesting that SLED essentially commandeer this investigation.
Yeah,
because
it was
appears
spanning multiple counties. It was, and we'll see additional information as to why SLED was involved when we get to the arrest of our last 2 suspects.
Right. Yeah, the stars of the show, per se. Right. So within hours of her apprehension, SLED is requested to totally commandeer. They were assisting, but once our suspects started going over county lines and state lines, that is when SLED was called to commandeer entirely. And then, as we know now, SLED then put out a request to the U.S. Marshals Service to further apprehend these suspects who appear to have been absconding from justice. And come April 11th, they apprehend I want to credit our sources accordingly, the Great Lakes Regional Fugitive Task Force, GLRFTF. They apprehend these 2. While the arrest, the nature of the arrest is unclear at this time, they apprehended Jamal Terrell Riley, 30, and Kayla Terria Bostic, 34, in connection to this kidnapping that had occurred some 1,000 miles from where they were caught. So they were tossed over in the Knox County Illinois jail, where, according to our records, they remain awaiting extradition.
Actually, I just checked this morning and they have been extradited.
Great goodness.
Yep, they're on their way back to South Carolina.
Well, I guess it took them long enough, huh? Right. So yeah, they were waiting there for how long? I mean, hell, they were apprehended on the 11th. It's the 26th now, and yesterday, it's our understanding they were still there in Knox County. So now they're inbound.
Yep.
And once SLED announced their arrest, that's of course when FITSNews did what we do best, which is really dig into these suspects. So we know that Adrienne, again, she's a habitual traffic offender. According to her LinkedIn, a what is she? A housekeeper, self-defined housekeeper.
Yeah.
Then we've got Jamal Riley, who, I mean, he takes the cake, because we uncovered a defunct Facebook of Jamal Riley's that he created, as it appears, while he was incarcerated
in
for
prison, SCDC.
In prison, as he was sentenced in 2012 to 10 years for armed robbery, 10 years for, wait for it, kidnapping, 5 years for criminal conspiracy by Clifton Newman at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And within 7 months of filing a notice to appeal the kidnapping charge, since Mr. Riley attested that he was only lookout during the armed robbery, he sat in a car, he didn't put a gun in front of anybody's face. He filed that notice to appeal and appears to have created a Facebook page while incarcerated. And again, fortunate enough to print off this one picture, his profile picture here. So there's our guy, Jamal, as he calls himself, G-Shine Riley, which is pertinent when you start looking at the sets of the United Blood Nation, which he is claiming to be a member of. And what's most important here is he's actually showcasing his 5-pointed star tattoo right here, which is, of course, pledging allegiance, pledging loyalty to the Bloods gang, and that on top of just blatantly saying blood, 24 karat, bunch of explicits across multiple Facebook status updates, posing with red bandanas. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this one out. And he posted for over a year uninterrupted on his Facebook page here, until he ultimately went quiet till 2021, when he starts landing back in the public index. It's my understanding, Jen, we don't exactly know when he was released from incarceration.
Have his exact date of release quite yet, but we do have our request in the SCDC to see when he was released and if we can get information on the terms of his parole, because he was not long out of jail before he started reoffending, including in Jasper and Aiken.
Right. We've got drug charges, we've got weapons charges, and fear not, though. I mean, he wasn't always on the wrong side of the law, as we came to find out, right? So after massing a few drug charges, what he is listed as permanently disabled in a lawsuit against one of his buddies, because they all went drinking, got in a car, he was riding passenger. Fella buddy one slams into a tree, he's permanently disabled, right?
Yep. And I mean, I guess not disabled enough to stop him from assaulting a woman within an inch of his life. So
right, and bounding her behind the hands, and right. So not enough.
And there was a pending charge from 2021 that we found in Jasper County that had been sitting there. All of the preliminary hearings had been held, and on April, I believe, 18th, the solicitor listed a new item in the public index. They indicted him.
Right, the day after SLED announced his arrest. After.
Is that a coincidence? I don't think it is. I think
after having been listed as a suspect since the 3rd, the day after SLED announces his arrest, they indict him. So it's safe to say that he likely broke his bond already. It was a $10,000 bond that he had posted years prior for that weapons charge when he started absconding from justice. But leave it to the solicitors to, as it appears, not find out about that until SLED announces his arrest.
Yeah, whoopsie daisy.
Yeah, whoopsie daisy. And you're right. He caught that weapons charge around the same time he was listed as a victim. We're still talking about this guy right here, by the way. So
Uh-huh.
he's listed as a victim in an Aiken County Sheriff's Office incident report where he loans his Acura to Miss Bostic, the woman who he's apprehended with in Illinois. He loans his Acura to Kayla, and then the Acura winds up in a high-speed chase with Highway Patrol, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, he's listed as a victim because what he says the vehicle was stolen. He was out of state at that time. We're not
Wasn't me.
insinuating anything.
Wasn't me driving.
Right.
If they found drugs in that car, it wasn't mine.
Certainly weren't mine.
Yeah.
So
I mean, that's going to be one that we definitely, we're going to have to follow that one through the court system, because one of those people that does not need to clearly be out
right.
amongst us anytime in the near future.
And we're looking at, this is his second kidnapping charge here. Kidnapping charges are no laughing matter. I mean, while uncommon, it's not unheard of to see folks get sentenced to life for kidnapping, and especially considering the nature in which he left this victim at that Corner Lake boat landing. We are all going to be very interested in seeing what happens here. And with the help of your research and my clickings away on the computer, we published that sweeping report, G. Shine Blood listed as suspect in Lowcountry kidnapping. I certainly encourage anybody interested in this story to go read that full article, see just what Mr. Riley was posting on Facebook, because we did cite some of his status updates and embedded them as well. And Dylan, I don't know if were we going to discuss some of the comments on that article?
Yeah. First of all, somebody, KY Moonrunner, says they were going to put their boat in at the Corner Lake the day that all the law enforcement was over there, and they got the heck out of there.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, it's a high traffic spillway. It is remote. There is no Google Street View of this Corner Lake Road. But even when I went and visited, I mean, we had folks going in and out, just going to observe the nature, to hang out, and you could tell just by standing there the amount of shell casings and beer bottles all around the area. It's definitely a hangout spot.
But it's not a place that you would know about. It's not like a somewhere you would drop a victim out of convenience. It's somebody would have known about the spot, is kind of the impression I got.
And that was the impression I got too. I mean, it is a destination point, as you mentioned. I mean, it's approximately a mile off the main road, off of the Google Street View, right?
Right.
We're talking canopy trees, dead silence, muddy water.
It's
Right.
certainly an
Yes.
interesting choice to leave somebody darn near dead, where, according to you, anybody who is familiar with the area would understand that somebody would find them either dead or alive fairly soon. And I mean, clearly the suspects knew that there was going to be some heat on them, because they went halfway across the country.
And we don't know when they began their absconding here. I suspect, and you know how much I love to suspect here, but they apprehend suspect one, Miss Ginn, and it appears as though movement started not too long after that, because then we have two different sheriff's offices requesting sleds, assistance. It's probably safe to assume that around that time, the chase ensued there. I mean, they were again apprehended 14 and a half hours from where this took place.
Yeah, it is. I used to live in Indiana. It is not a easy drive from Indiana to the Lowcountry. It is.
Right.
They must have had somebody there was a destination they were going to. Yeah, it's sad, and we don't know how long the woman had been there before they discovered her.
Right. So according to SLED in this case, as soon as they commandeered the investigation, they asked for any and all surveillance video of any vehicles traveling a number of roads that they did list in a press release in the Lowcountry area. And the time frame that they were looking at was 1 to 3 o'clock the day she was found, which does indicate that it appears our two or three suspects here traveled approximately 74 miles from Barnwell to drop her off in broad daylight. So again, seeing just how high traffic that spillway is, it might be safe to assume that she was not there for very long. But
Yeah.
why just to leave her so badly bruised in that state, but in the same breath leaving a witness, leaving somebody who could point you out in a lineup in a grassy patch adjacent to the tree line, not tossing her into the water. I can't make sense of what these folks had in mind.
Well, if there were drugs involved, as Dylan says, not everything people do while they are on drugs makes sense.
Cheryl has said, things have a way of falling through the cracks in Jasper County. Please stay on top of that so that those those responsible will be held accountable. If I'm correct here, the U.S. Marshals were involved in reeling in at least one of the suspects, correct?
2 of them, the 2 in Indiana.
Both of them.
Yep.
So, I mean, you would hope, obviously South Carolina justice system has a way of screwing even the simplest of things up, but you would hope that suspects, which they had to employ the help of the U.S. Marshals, some of the baddest ass of badasses out there, to reel in, that they would take the prosecution seriously here. And like you say, I mean, these charges have the potential to put them away for the remainder of their lives. And if you've already been convicted of very similar crimes and then get out, and somebody's asking how long since their release was this, but I don't know if you have that information on hand.
Not yet. We're waiting on a FOIA.
I think we could say like in the approximate region, and of course, SCDOC is taking their precious time in getting us inmate records. What a prison, taking their time. That's shocking. But I mean, there appears to have been a void in the public index or charges against Mr. Riley. So, we've got that incarceration in 2012, and then we see more charges come up back in 2021. So I'm not going to speculate here, but it does not appear like he was out for a terribly long amount of time before there were some reoffendings in there. And of course, as you noted, he is in the process of being extradited back to South Carolina for
he has not made it back. He's
more
not in
kidnapping charges.
Yeah, he's not in South Carolina's system quite yet, and we haven't seen the charges show up in the public index for this.
Right.
But if they're being handled by the statewide grand jury, we may not see them in the public index. We'll have to follow them through the AG's office.
Okay, right.
But either way, we're not going anywhere on this story because this person's clearly a danger to the public if the allegations being made by the state are true.
Yeah. And then we had the woman in Walterboro that sadly was found, shortly after the woman in Jasper County, deceased in a suitcase on abandoned property, right downtown Walterboro.
Right.
And we're we're still waiting, more information on the investigation into that, which is obviously a murder because she didn't shoot herself into a suitcase.
I wouldn't think so.
The initial information I was hearing from locals, which we have not obviously verified through law enforcement, was that this could potentially be drug related.
That is what I surmise too. So yes, I mean just what is it, August, April 3rd to April 10th. I mean, we're talking a 7-day difference. So 7 days after a half-naked woman was found purportedly zip-tied on a boat landing, we have just a couple miles away on the 200 block of Moore Street, which this was fortunate enough to be afforded to me for a print today. 200 block of Moore Street here near this abandoned building is where Walterboro PD found, as you indicated, a woman, quote, decomposing in a suitcase. And that was another incident that FITSNews had to rely on some eyes and ears for, because we broke the story before law enforcement broke the story. Some would say that WPD perhaps missed the strike on this one. But yes, a few days later, they did identify that woman in the suitcase as Victoria Jean Beach, 32, of that region. So now, speaking on how it's drug related, well, it again doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that Victoria Beach has been charged for many drug offenses in her past. Then that's not just according to the public index, that's according to the sheriff's office out there, because you know how sheriff's offices love to parade arrests and anybody having a bad day. So they have name dropped her in the past for what was it, possession of what appears to have been heroin at that time. And yeah, certainly a repeat drug user throughout that area, an area that you, Jen, have covered extensively as being, deeply gang affiliated.
A lot of gang affiliation in
Yes.
Gallatin. Yeah.
And in fact, it was with your research that I was able to deduce that, we've had gang members hit with grand jury indictments for, as you have noted in the past, drive-by shootings, arson attacks, assaults, all within a mile's radius of where this woman was found decomposing in a suitcase. And we've got a myriad of gang disputes in that area, and we've got some sources very credible telling us some very interesting things about Miss Beach, about Miss Adrienne Ginn. And it's worth noting why we consider these sources so credible. Well, they name dropped these individuals before law enforcement even did. So perhaps they've got some understanding as to what they're talking about. But yes, we're certainly going to stay on the suitcase incident as well. I mean, that was something that truly rocked the state. I mean, we had folks talking on social media about it from, the upstate to the Lowcountry. And rightfully so. It was an inexplicable incident that WPD was not talking about.
Yeah.
And I think in prior coverages, we talked about how there were spokespersons over at WPD clearly not communicating with the left hand while the right hand was saying something totally different. But that's a different issue for a different day.
It's hard. I know they're balancing, the integrity in the investigation with, their need to notify the public of things like this. But, in small areas like Walterboro and Hampton, people talk, you've got a big law enforcement presence at an abandoned building, and people talk, and the public starts getting rumors. The rumors get out of hand, and the waiting a couple of days before you address what was found, not necessarily the best approach.
and let's talk about that for a moment, because in small towns or big towns, it doesn't matter the size of the town, people are going to talk, especially when a woman is found decomposing in a suitcase. But where I take issue is where law enforcement themselves tell me that no, there was no kidnapping reported, and then within the hour a different law enforcement officer says to a different journalist that yes, we were investigating on grounds of a kidnapping. Well, which one is it? Because y'all are telling the public two completely different things simultaneously, and that's law enforcement talking.
Right.
And this is, of course, days after we published that there even was somebody found in a suitcase. So it's not so much, not jeopardizing the integrity of the investigation. You are giving two completely different stories.
Right.
So that's where I take issue. But I think frequent readers, frequent viewers of this outlet know that, I'm certainly a bit critical of our law enforcement officers.
The same user who told us that they were at the boat ramp is now saying that they were 2 days prior to the discovery of the body in the suitcase right in the area in downtown Walterboro, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I'm going to be referring you to the state law enforcement division.
Hey, Moonrunner. Let's hope Sled isn't watching. I'm kidding.
Yeah, we got friends over there.
Yeah.
Yeah, they
literally,
love us.
the feds are watching.
No, yeah, it is scary, and I know that in March there had been a very large federal announcement of federal indictments related to the drug trafficking ring that was based in Colleton County and Dorchester and Berkeley County.
Right.
And you have to wonder if, there's any of this as, fallout from that, because
Mhm.
to build these cases, you have to get these sources. You have to,
Right.
they've been working on these cases obviously for years, it's, and there is a history of government witnesses, in that area in Colleton County, government witnesses, um, their lives being,
Mhm.
taken or being shot, attempts on their lives. So, it is something that we're watching closely, because we do know that it is a constant battle in those areas to get on
Right.
top of these gangs. Um, so yeah, we are keeping an eye on everything happening both in the federal court system and in the county court systems.
Mhm. And speaking of keeping an eye on those systems, I mean, hell, we had learned that Miss Beach had actually been sentenced to 18 months incarcerated around December 7th, 2023. And as we know, she was out. So what were the conditions of her release amid this gang-addled territory? Only time will tell.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, just something that we are keeping in the back of our heads
Hmm.
as we watch these cases unfold.
Right, right. And then I suppose finally we must address this minor elephant in the room because on April 3rd, CPD Columbia Police Department also discovered a woman dead in a dumpster behind a convenience store in downtown. So that woman was swiftly identified as a 32-year-old Polaro Pole. Suspect was purportedly identified almost immediately. There were some murmurs of domestic issues. And I only mention this case because, while we didn't know much of anything, there were some journalists, uh, unfortunately, who were trying to connect all of these as related. But I think we could see through laying out timelines here that they weren't. Um, that being said, I don't want to give CPD too much credit here. They did just have an officer leave his safety off on a vacation, which resulted in a 4-year-old shooting himself in the head. But nonetheless, those are the three incidents that certainly very simultaneous within a very short amount of time. Some very egregious moments here in a very short amount of time. And
Somebody on Twitter had asked if we had looked at if Regina Arroyo, she disappeared from her home in Barnwell in December of 2023 and was found um, a week or so later in a
mhm,
body of water in Lexington County,
mhm,
deceased, her body. That I believe that investigation is ongoing, but yes, that is something that I am actively looking
yeah.
into, because the
It,
circumstances are very, very similar.
and it was very interesting on the topic of this incident here that once all these started popping up between April 3rd, April 10th, April 12th, the FITSNews team started learning of a lot of missing women within the northern region of Georgia and the South Carolina
Mm-hmm.
Lowcountry. So there was all of these speculations. Well, is this woman who's been missing since 2020? Is this her? Is this woman missing since 2022? Her? So yes, it was very alarming that through tragedy we learned of additional tragedies of just unexplained disappearances. Um, so is there a connection? Possibly, and I wouldn't rule that out for the other individuals that have unfortunately gone missing in similar circumstances.
Right. I mean, it's something that I do. I have maps. I keep track of these things.
Hmm.
When somebody forwards me them, I do try to keep track of them because,
Right.
everybody has families that are missing them and loved
Hmm.
ones that are wondering where they are. And
Right.
I do think it matters.
Right. I agree, and I know that with the folks that you have discussed as well through your um, Missing Carolina series. I've gotten to know a few of them through unrelated reports. They are certainly appreciative that while law enforcement may have forgotten about their loved ones, that you haven't. That FITSNews continues to follow them and cover them. So yeah, I'm sure that families are grateful, and I'm certainly grateful as well to be afforded the opportunity to continue following stories that matter. So that's what I've got.
Well, thanks for joining us, and thanks for sharing, the process that we go through to
Hmm.
to get these stories and verify them. And
Right.
you worked hard on these.
Well, we all have you. I mean,
Well,
this truly is a team effort. It truly takes a village here at FITSNews to achieve excellence, which I like to think that we do. Unlike newsrooms that say they're a team and then work against you the whole time, this one's a little different. Um, Dylan, are there any other comments we should address? Anything?
I think you did a great job of addressing, the biggest question, which I've seen repeatedly across all of these stories, which is just, is there any possible connection? Obviously, we don't have enough information to know for sure, but I think you fleshed out kind of everything that we do know. I would like to
Hmm.
speak to what you just talked about. We were eating lunch at the hibachi house one day after you, Will, and I were at the state house, and you told me what you just said. Oh, it's surprising to me that you guys actually work as a team here, and like don't backstab one another. And my
Uh-huh.
reaction was like, of course we do. We're a team of less than 10 people.
Hmm.
If we were trying to backstab each other in a team so small, it would just be insane. But it does make me really, having not worked in a conventional newsroom where people act like that,
Hmm.
it makes me appreciate what we have here a lot.
but yeah, when Will was assigning the Walterboro woman, the woman in Walterboro, Andy's like, "I'm sorry, did I take that from you?" I'm like, "Oh, no, 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 you have it. I will be
I
happy
was
to
under the
provide
impression.
support."
Yeah, so he walks into my office and calls you, and I was under the impression he was assigning that to me, and so that
I'm
there was
like,
some
"Nope.
miscommunication on that
Let's
part.
go. I am here to
Yeah,
do the research
yeah,
and send it your way."
yeah. But no, it's quite reprehensible, Dylan, how a conventional box store corporate newsroom will tell you that we're working as a team and working together, and it proceeds to do the absolute opposite day in, day out. I mean, chronically undersupported, underfunded, undersupplied, and then you come to Fitz News and something that Mark Powell, another one of our content writers, who I think puts it best. He says, the writers, the content creators here at Fitz News, they're doing their own thing on an island somewhere, and they're not stepping on other people's stories, other people's territories, and that'll prompt everybody to help out. Perhaps he may have hit the nail on the head or not, but I thought it was an interesting note, and it's got some merit to it. I mean, me assailing police, you on unsolved Carolinas, Dylan doing his state house legislature, and then all of us wearing different hats anyway. So yeah, I think there's some merit.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good team. I enjoy it.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming on. Maybe we'll have to have Mark on. I think we'll have to make the show 3 hours because Mark has plenty of stories to tell.
I love Mark
Yeah.
stories.
Just one more minute. Just one more minute, guys. Yeah. All right. If y'all don't need me anymore, I'm gonna sign off here.
All right, good luck with the printer.
Yeah, that's far from over.
We might have a
See
good
y'all.
team here at FITSNews, but we have a bad printer.
Bad printers.
I got you covered. I'll bring you one.
Okay, that's enough for me. I'll talk to y'all later.
So I want to take the opportunity to talk about a story I've been working on this week, which are the pro-Palestine protesters down at the University of South Carolina. Now, folks who watch the television or are engaged on social media have probably seen at Columbia University, Yale University, most of the country's Ivies, and then some schools in Florida, Georgia, Texas. There have been massive and somewhat violent over the last couple of days, at least getting broken up by the police. I don't know how violent the students are getting, but there have been massive pro-Palestine protests at university campuses across the country. And so when I learned through social media that this was kicking off at USC, the school I just graduated from a couple of years ago, I was, of course, interested to go head down to campus and see what I could see. Um, it was very interesting, these kinds of people that attend these protests, and I could pull out, half a dozen videos of this happening over the last 12 hours. But if you approach as a journalist, you usually will have people stick objects in front of your camera, potentially try to knock it on the ground. They certainly won't talk to you. It's just a very aggressive approach that many of these demonstrators, especially at these schools where there's a really contentious situation going on, take towards the media. So I was, did put in a full day's work here at FITSNews, and then I was driving home and I said, all right, I'm gonna go scope out the situation and see what's going on down there. And so I kind of sat far away initially, looked at the protesters, and there was probably about a dozen students. And you could tell immediately this was not the situation that's going on uh, at some of these schools where it's getting crazy. I mean, there was mostly kids sitting on a picnic blanket. One was like playing a Casio keyboard, playing the music from the video game Minecraft really slowly and lethargically, possibly having eating a pot gummy prior to attending this event. But I decided, okay, I think if I actually want to, get within earshot of this group to kind of understand who are these people that are here, why are they here, what's going on, my best bet is just to be a student. And I look young enough that I think I'll probably be able to blend in with the college students for another decade. But I just kind of stood around until one of the organizers of the event handed me a poster and was like, "You want to join us?" And I said, "Sure." So I went and sat down with the group, and I did not expect what happened next, which was a Jewish Seder Passover prayer service. Um, Now, in doing research after this, I've learned that Jewish Voice for Peace, it's a organization which Zionistic Jews obviously don't like because it is a organization of Jewish people in America who are for a one state solution, meaning the no longer will the state of Israel exist. There will be like a democratic Arab state uh, in the place of current Israel and Palestine. At least this is what the people from SJP who I spoke with at this event were advocating for. But I went to this event and it was about an hour-long Seder service, which I really enjoyed. I've had the pleasure of doing a couple of Jewish religious things through my friends like bar mitzvahs and whatnot growing up. There aren't, unfortunately, a ton of Jewish people down here in South Carolina. So it was one of the first like Jewish religious things that I had the opportunity to learn about down here. But it was certainly bizarre um, doing this in the middle of a protest against the state of Israel. But I guess my big finding would really be that at USC, there is certainly not the powerful anti-Zionistic movement that we're seeing across the country. And some people didn't like my reporting because I, kind of took a couple of digs at these people for not having many supporters there. But the reality is, in talking with the dozen to 15 people who were there, kind of coming and going throughout the course of the 2 hours that I was there, I would say 2/3 of them were your kind of generic progressive show up to the protest of the day, the folks that would be there if it was a Black Lives Matter rally or a abortion protest or anything of that ilk. And, God bless them. It's their First Amendment right
Social
to do that.
activist,
Right.
regular social activist.
But then I would say there was another third who were there who were actually there for that specific cause. Those are the ones who I think might be able to point to where Israel is on a map. But I think we should run through some of the comments because there was obviously a
Yeah, we got a
divisive
lot,
issue like that. We did get really interesting comments on the website, which folks don't all know, but you can comment on our website, and it's a pretty old school comment section, unlike YouTube or Instagram or Facebook, where if you say some crazy stuff, your posts are going to go away. I mean, it's pretty it's the Wild West out there. So somebody comments, "We gonna turn Israel into was real," and while these students that you're talking to, I don't know that all of them completely understand what they're advocating for, but this is kind of the basis of the "from the river to the sea," which was all over their posters. Palestine will be free. Well, that means that is what these students are advocating for, turning Israel into was real, because if you follow that logic and follow that plan, there is no more state of Israel. there was a person who says stop the genocide who says good on those students. So obviously there are some people who were reading this article who are in agreement, and I'm not saying that there's not a valid dispute to be had with the way that Israel has conducted their war in Gaza as a result of the October 7th terrorist attacks. Obviously, there have been massive amounts of casualties for civilians, many of whom are women and children who obviously are not combatants, but who are in Gaza, uh, who have been struck by munitions. Those who are unfamiliar, Gaza is not a country which one can enter and leave freely. It borders um, Egypt, it borders the ocean, but none of these places have porous borders. So folks that are in Gaza, whether they support Hamas or not, and I think a fair amount of them do support Hamas, but whether they do or don't, it's a very small place. So when it's being bombed all over the place, obviously it's a terrible situation for them. And look, some of my coverage obviously emphasized the fact that there were about 15 students there and that they were a pretty unserious group. And I'm not trying to say that I'm minimizing the seriousness of the situation there or that I don't understand why people are upset. But also, I'm trying to provide folks who aren't at the university who might be looking at coverage from across the country, seeing how serious the situation is with the protesters at schools like Columbia, schools like NYU, and just let them know that that's not the case here. Another comment that I thought was pretty interesting. This is the Colonel commenting. The Colonel comments on a lot of our posts, and I usually enjoy them. Why does this insanity happen when I leave the coop? That's the school's library next to which this protest happened. Early, I wish I could have slipped one of the facility guys a Benjamin to turn the sprinklers on. It's funny he says that because that's actually how a lot of schools have reacted to these protesters. They've just turned on the sprinklers. Turns out it's pretty effective. A lot of them stick buckets and stuff over top of the sprinklers to keep themselves from getting soaked. But I actually saw a clip yesterday where, the Palestine students had stuck a bucket over the sprinkler. And then another member of the student body who clearly was not in agreement with them removed the bucket, resulting in them all getting flooded. They didn't do that here at USC. Actually, there were 3 administrators looking types who were overseeing the event. And to be fair, any student organization who's not protesting unlawfully can go to the university and say, we would like to set up a table at X location at X time, and you're granted that privilege. There were, from what I understand, although I've looked for arrest records and not have seen this, so these people might have just been removed by the police but not actually detained. There were 2 students who were at the very least escorted out of the Russell House Student Union on Wednesday. I was told that there was going to be an occupation of the Russell House when I went to the protest on Monday. I checked back in on Wednesday. By the time I got there, which was late in the afternoon, I guess these people had, got tired of occupying the Russell House. Their table was still there with all the signs and stuff, but there was literally nobody there. Now, perhaps the 2 who had been drug out of the building were the diehards that were going to sit there all day. I'm not really sure.
I used to work at the University of Michigan in the provost office, and one spring when I was working, somebody literally handcuffed themselves to my desk. And I don't
did you
remember
just
what
work
they
with them handcuffed to your desk all day?
Literally, I worked all day with them handcuffed to my
Knowing
desk.
you probably gave them a snack and
I
some
did.
water.
I was like, "Are you hungry? Do you need some coffee? I don't know what you're protesting, but
Did they go to the bathroom? How long were they chained to your desk?
all day, all day, all day."
They
And
just
then
had to
when,
hold it all day, or what?
yeah,
Man, these
when
people
we
really don't think far into the future.
they did not, but they were delightful. And at the end of the day, when we were closing up shop, we're like, "Gotta go."
Do they stay there, or
No, they left. I'm like, okay.
man, that is hilarious. So there's a couple more of these comments which I would like to read. Mary says, just more entitled children jumping on the bandwagon for a cause they know nothing about. My assessment of this sentiment is that it's true for about 2/3 of them. I would say 2/3 of them probably couldn't point to Israel on a map. The other third actually do know what they're advocating for. She says it's telling that the organizer of this gathering is not even affiliated with USC. And this speaks to why I didn't tell people my true identity, because I was able to just plop my butt down on the ground, act like a college kid. And then when this gal comes back, I start chatting with her, trying to figure out, okay, what's your deal? She's not even a USC student. I didn't, prod people like I'm asking 20 questions, because that's just not how normal human beings interact. And obviously my cover would not last for very long if I started acting like that. So I don't know exactly what her deal was, what her name is, what her occupation is, what brought her there. But she was discussing the fact that she's not a university student. And it's important to note that, because there were two people there who were addressing the public, I would say. Like the gentleman named Kyle, who, gentle might be the wrong word, the man named Kyle who handed me the poster and brought me in. He was addressing the public. And then there was this young woman. And she wasn't even from the university. And the rest of the folks, none of them were like reaching out, Free Palestine, making eye contact with other students and talking about them, which is why I say this was a pretty low energy protest. Um, no, Indy says you're not normal though. Yeah, you're right. No, I stick out like a sore thumb. I'm definitely not normal. But I challenge you to look at the groups of people who sit at protests like this. I would say normal. It's not an adjective that applies to really any of them there. So being normal, being a stiff would definitely actually stand out more there. Her comment continues. This is Mary's comment, which I was just reading. Veritas, Wikipedia, among the G20, 9 countries, Argentina, Brazil, China, India, Indonesia, Russia, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, and Turkey have recognized Palestine as a state, while 10 countries, Australia, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, South Korea, Mexico, UK, US, have not. And that's an important comment, because if you're familiar with geopolitics, that's kind of the group of countries that we align with on one side, and the group that we don't on the other side. This goes back even so far as the Cold War, where we had countries which were affiliated with the United States, countries affiliated with the USSR, and countries which were kind of trying to play the middle. Many of those same dynamics exist even now.
Guess who's not familiar with geopolitics? Me.
Now,
I always learn a lot when I talk to you.
The main contention from these protesters, though, is that it's time for the University of South Carolina to divest their investments from Israeli-related companies. And this is the call from a lot of these activists across the country. And I think it's important to understand that the university, they have a fiduciary duty, meaning that they have a duty to the folks who operate that fund to get the highest return on investment they can. And some schools, particularly progressive schools, have divested from certain industries like oil and energy. And that's going to be tough for them, because now when these protesters come and demand that you divest, you can't make the excuse that USC can, because they've never done anything like this, to say, look, we have this obligation to make as much money as we can on these investments to fund the university's operations. Do I expect USC to listen to 15 students? No. Will this be an interesting conversation at larger institutions which have dozens of faculty members getting arrested and hundreds of students getting expelled? I do think that this is something that will actually be a point of contention moving forward. And here I'd like to address, before we move from this topic, one comment. Students are doing well protesting this genocide. However, this coverage is so biased. Professionalism is misused in this article. Why is Mr. Allmert quoted a lot when he is not related to the protest and he is not a university official? Unless the writer is trying to twist the story in a different direction. Oh yeah, the writer is not a journalist. He is a business degree holder. Got it. This is why. So Dr. Allmert, I actually had the pleasure of attending his classes while I was studying at the University of South Carolina, ironically addressing the last part of this comment. It was a class about the news media and being a member of the news media, which I took while I was getting the political science minor, which I have as a part of my accounting degree. I would argue that an accounting degree is actually a pretty good background for a journalist, because it teaches you to look at systems and identify where they are liable to be exploited. It gives you a very analytical mindset. And I would argue that going to college and paying tens of thousands of dollars for a degree in a soft science is moronic, especially if you got to pay back those loans. So I'm very happy to have gone and pursued an accounting degree as I did, because I think it helps me in my work every day. But I quoted Dr. Almert because he is the brother of the former Prime Minister of Israel. He's former spokesman for the State of Israel, and the front half of the piece is obviously all um, dedicated to the viewpoints of the pro-Palestinian protesters. So I wanted to have somebody who, while he's not an official representative of the university, and I'm thankful for that because he would have given me the most bland, boring, useless statement ever, which is why I didn't even reach out to the university because PIOs are great at giving you terrible statements. He spoke his mind. He spoke on behalf of the population of the school who thinks the other way. So I think that he was a great person to quote.
Yeah, I always
And
think you do a really good job trying to
yeah,
balance
you
your
know,
stories out.
it, as a lot of people when they don't like your coverage will say journalists have to be completely down the line, completely objective. And if you're going for the absolute straightest of news, straight news, AP Newswire release, then that is what you certainly should be doing. But I think that it's a greater service to our readers to come in there and let let what you see color how you cover it a little bit. I'm not here to say that you should feel one way or the other about how the state of Israel is acting, or that you should feel one way or the other about um, the Palestinian cause. But I am certainly going to let my opinion of how people are conducting themselves bleed into my writing, because I think that for folks who aren't there but who want to understand the tone and the tenor of these protests, I would be doing them a disservice if I just wrote it up as a straight news piece with some milquetoast quotes from the university, and didn't do my utmost to try to uh, show as much as I can of each of the sides of this debate.
I agree.
Well, I've talked quite a bit, Jennifer. Would you mind introducing our audience to the recent developments in the Bowen Turner saga? Because I
Oh,
think that's something folks want to hear
good.
about.
Good gracious. Okay, so Bowen Turner, as you know, as we have covered throughout the past couple of years, is, America's poster boy for leniency due to, social status. And, we've been following him and following his, pleas, his arrest, his everything going on with him. He was released from SCDC in December, and just this past, I think it was February, he was arrested in Florence for DUI. And, we started getting reports that the arrest was anything but a ordinary arrest. So we started FOIAing for incident reports, you know, body cams, dash cams. And in South Carolina, body cams are not considered public information. It's up to the local um, department that you're asking for whether or not they release it. The Highway Patrol responded to this because it was a driving under the influence. It was an accident that happened, and they were very, very generous and provided us with the dash cam, the full incident report. And as we saw, the charges in the public index against Bowen Turner included driving under the influence, open containers, resisting arrest. I mean, just it ran the gambit. He did not go quietly, and the camera footage that they provided us with this month was very indicative of just how out of the ordinary this arrest was. And we published it, did a story on it, and I think we've nominated Trooper Sierra Calamaris a Trooper of the Year award because she handled that belligerent jerk like a pro. It was very clear watching it. He has a lot of mental health issues. He was clearly inebriated, was yelling at her and then asking her to let him go. Like, it would go from screaming at her and calling her profanities to, ma'am, I've done nothing. I mean, it was a long ride to watch for us watching the camera. I can't even imagine Trooper Calamaris. It was probably twice as long for her. So we got
She
that
probably
in,
doesn't think
and
twice about it. As a highway trooper, I'm sure she deals with obstinate drunk idiots on a fairly
yes,
regular basis.
yes.
What folks want to know, is, and this is pretty on the nose here, so this is obviously not coming from us, but how can you rape 3 people and be out of jail? I think it's important to understand, and this is something that I've, through doing this job and talking to victims repeatedly, it's really hard to prove a rape case.
Hmm.
Even if you have a rape kit, if it's not happening with somebody directly witnessing it or on camera, it's a really hard crime to prove. And that puts prosecutors and the judicial system in general trying to hold people that commit these crimes accountable in a really bad position. This is why we say thrice accused teen rapist.
Right.
Now, I evaluate personally the credibility of those accusations to be quite high, at least the ones that I know of, particularly Chloe Bess's allegation, because I've been able to interview Chloe and she seems credible to me. But for a court of law, for prosecutors to go down that road, it's very difficult. But something that should be noted is I attended the JMSC, or judicial, screening for folks who want to be judges, hearing of David Miller. He was the assistant solicitor who was charged with putting together the plea deal that eventually let Bowen Turner skate on a simple assault charge, from what started as 3 pretty serious rape allegations. And it was very interesting being there because, Miller's talking to a panel of uh, defense attorneys, legislators, folks who are very powerful in the South Carolina judicial system, and folks who certainly understand how the system works. And Miller was basically saying, like, look, you guys know I was not in a position to do much better than I did, but they absolutely crucified him. Pete Strom in particular. It's
Yeah, that panel is, I mean, I've watched a lot of those, thankfully, because you went and got footage of it. And that panel's not there. They question you. And Pete Strom did not go easy on Miller. Rightfully
Yeah,
so.
and those two
Rightfully
have
so.
a long relationship that is positive. You can look at
Hmm.
transcripts of their previous interactions, and you can tell that Strom is quite fond of him.
Right.
But it was repeatedly emphasized that he gave the whole South Carolina legal community a black eye. So when folks say, how can you rape 3 people and be out of jail? You can rape 3 people and be out of jail if there's not enough evidence for the state to feel like they can proceed to a trial and have a high enough probability of securing a conviction that it's worth it to them. And unfortunately, as Please Pass the Pepper says, quote, as a survivor, trust me, most do not report. It's just not worth it. Getting
Yes.
better than when I was younger. So I thought until this case. Hopefully, the kind of pressure that we saw and honestly the derailment of David Miller's career is something that other assistant solicitors will remember, because while I'm not sure that David Miller did anything out of the ordinary for the way that our system currently operates, I do think that there was some validity to his arguments that he made. It was clear that they were trying to set a tone at the top there at the JMSC that this kind of black eye on the legal community is not something that they're going to tolerate, because between stuff like Alex Murdaugh, showing that a crook was able to so easily operate within the South Carolina legal community, you think it's a little bit strange that none of these very sophisticated attorneys noticed his crimes that he was committing for years. They're certainly on edge here in South Carolina. So maybe this will put some pressure on them. But yes, as it currently stands, it's very difficult for survivors or people who want to come forward with a rape allegation or other violent crime allegations to actually see somebody go behind bars. And
It is
as
so
this,
hard. It's so difficult to report in the first place. It's just, like Pepper said, a lot of them go unreported because it is so, the process of reporting is so difficult and
and in this case, we had
arduous.
3 people who reported,
Three
one of which
people.
killed themselves. So obviously that's not great for going to trial, but 2 of which could certainly have gone to trial and looked a jury in the eye and said, this
Credible
man sitting there
witnesses.
raped me. I mean, and the fact that the state still did not bring those charges
Yeah. And his dad was a investigator solicitor's office.
still
Clearly
is.
clearly has connections. And it's, even after he was out on those, he reoffended in Orangeburg. And,
And this is the second person we're talking about in this live stream who is a recidivist.
yeah,
Many of the criminals who we cover on FITSNews are folks who have gone through the judicial system, who the state had an opportunity to keep away from society and to prevent from doing further harm, and who end up back in the custody of the state because they were incapable of doing that. And, we have to take pause and say, look, we push for judicial reform here in South Carolina, the JMSC, which we were just talking about. That's how we select our circuit court judges. But the problem is a lot broader than that. The problem comes from, if a police department doesn't have adequate resources or talent to adequately document the crimes, well, then the crime comes to the solicitor and they can't really pursue a
Ding, ding.
case because there's not enough evidence.
they didn't get the investigation. They didn't get enough information on the investigation.
Or
Yeah,
the
I
problem
mean,
could come at the solicitor's office if they don't
right.
have enough staff there to handle their caseload and they're just trying to move cases. Well, it's a whole hell of a lot easier to plead a Bowen Turner down to a simple assault and, let society deal with him later than to take him to trial for rape and have to spend months preparing for that.
But yet we see this kid, he's getting out, he's reoffended. He goes to prison. He gets out again. He reoffends again. He is back in prison again. His parole was revoked. He is at Turbeville. Did I say that right?
Correct.
Yeah, I mean he's back there. Um, so
Please pass the pepper says, I didn't know his father was still actively employed. Unbelievable. I would like to say that his father and David Pasco, whom he works for, I haven't heard anything about them doing anything improprietous here. And I say that because David Pasco, whose father works for, immediately farmed the case out to another solicitor with whom there is no familiar relation to ensure that the investigation was done properly.
yeah, he's very good at conflicting cases out, and I have a
And
lot
he has
of
been the
respect for
recipient
him.
of some of the state's most famous conflict cases, such as the prosecution of the Quinns for their
Mhm.
political corruption.
Yep. Yep.
So the Bowen Turner update is Bowen Turner's back in SCDC. He obviously violated his parole.
He pled out on all of the charges in Florence County except the resisting arrest charge. That one is still pending and we are keeping an eye on it. But he is back in SCDC and I checked his record just now. And on April 23rd, April 24th, he was admitted to the addiction treatment unit.
Well, hopefully, whatever they're doing over there is worthwhile and can help him because clearly what we saw in that video, if there's not serious changes in his life, he is set to be a permanent ward of the state.
Yep. So as we get into, May is coming up on us quick. One of the big stories that we're going to be covering in May is the retrial of Michael Colucci. And we've had a couple of articles on FITSNews on that recently, and we have some more in progress relating to the first trial, the history of the case, and kind of getting our readers and our audience prepared for this upcoming retrial and what to expect. I think it's definitely going to be very interesting. The first trial was, I've been watching it for weeks now. First trial was fascinating because the case, circumstances of this case are not exactly open and shut, and we are going to see some familiar faces from the Murdaugh trial. So I think that's the trial begins May 13th. And, I did a piece this week on the evidence that was presented at the first trial. And what we're going to be looking at for this upcoming retrial.
Yeah, and I guess for folks who aren't aware that the actual homicide, the two were married. They owned a jewelry store. They were in financially hard times. I don't know, Jennifer, how much are we willing to say about potential drug use? Is it alleged? Is that like a matter of public record at
I
this
mean,
point?
it was mentioned during the trial. I don't know that
So it's
they
a matter
were.
of court
Yeah,
record.
yeah.
I don't really know how much we want to get into that, but there was some components of drug use, financial difficulties. The
Alcohol
two
abuse
alcohol. The two were out drinking. The the wife says, "I'm going to go use the restroom behind our jewelry store."
on the way
Uh,
home.
lovely stuff. Um, the husband says he's sitting in the car, listens to two songs, smokes a cigarette, gets out of the car, and from what I understand, she was actually visible from where he was parked,
Yeah.
but finds her hung with a garden hose. Obviously, there's a lot of questions like if you could see her, how did you let her hang herself with a garden hose directly in front of you? Now, with both parties potentially loaded up on alcohol or possibly other things, um, as we said earlier, drugs and alcohol can make you do crazy stuff that a logical person can't really understand. But
Yeah, you
it's
always
certainly
balance me out
suspicious
when I'm like,
circumstances.
when I say that, that absolutely doesn't make any sense. And you're like, well, let's say that they were on drugs. Not everything that somebody who is
Well,
on
or just,
drugs makes
really
sense.
drunk.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the circumstances were bizarre. Their marriage was in crisis. They had been, that day, had been at an attorney's office meeting with the attorney in Charleston about a lawsuit that they had pending in Charleston Circuit Court. And after they got done, well, during the meeting, she actually stepped out and called her mother and had a half an hour long conversation where she's, said, I'm going to, this is not good. I'm going to leave Michael this weekend. It's drugs. Her mother said, when asked on the stand, um, was he on drugs? She just said no. She implied it was drugs. So it's unknown, what she meant. But, that was the last conversation that Sarah Lynn's mother had with her. They proceeded to go, buy alcohol. They visited the grave of her first husband who died in 2007 of 28 accidental stab wounds in Horry County. I have so many FOIAs out on that because I do not understand what could have happened. But
And this is what Kim Brandt said on Facebook.
like,
How do you
what?
die? How do you have 28 accidental stab wounds? This is the
I
exact same question I asked you when you told me about this. Like,
I mean,
I've stabbed myself by accident once, but I didn't plunge the
I have
knife in another
found the
27 times.
obituary. I have found the grave. I have found no other record of this, but I have FOIAs in because there has got to be incident reports, autopsies. I'm on it. But they, it was the anniversary of her first husband's death. They had visited that, and on the way home, she had to use the restroom, and they were passing by their jewelry shop where they buy and sell gold. And he pulled in so she could use the restroom, and there was a gap in the fence. She, according to him, was slipped through that tiny gap. That became a real big point in the trial, whether or not she could have fit through that. And he sat there for 2 songs, smoked a cigarette, and said, "Do you need me to unlock the door?" She didn't respond, and he went over and, according to him, found her hanging from a garden hose. But police got there shortly after. Her lips were blue. Her skin was purple. For the amount of time that he said, liver mortis had set in, and the color of her skin was changing. It didn't align with the time frame that he gave her. Plus, he had an injury to his eye, scrapes on his knuckles. Her sunglasses were broken. She had a swollen eye. I mean, her nail had broken off. I mean, there was
Signs of a struggle. Obvious signs
signs
of
of
a
a
struggle.
struggle in the car, but like, but Berkeley County Sheriff's Office were first on scene. They handled the investigation, sent her body for an autopsy. They ruled it accidental. Her family raised holy heck, and the new sheriff, Dwayne Lewis, when he took office, agreed to reopen the investigation and forwarded it over to SLED in July. So she died in May of 2015. In July, they opened the case up with SLED. SLED did their investigation, and I believe it was May of the next year, filed charges against her husband, Michael Colucci, that he murdered Sarah. But the investigation came under great scrutiny during the first trial, which ended in a mistrial when the jury couldn't reach a verdict. The investigation was led by SLED agent David Owen, who we saw during the Murdaugh trial. His investigation came under a great deal of scrutiny under cross-examination. It did the same in the Colucci trial years earlier. They didn't get out to the scene until the following April, so 11 months after her death. There was a lot of questions about, he didn't interview the people at the law firm that saw them last to get a sense of, what the state, how they were acting. He didn't interview people at the cemetery. He didn't interview people where they had bought alcohol. There were no measurements of the hose done that she was hanging from. They didn't do any testing to see if it was even realistic that she hung from it. The investigation was very...
Special Agent David Owen, this is, like we talk about recidivism, it's a common theme in our reporting. Special Agent David Owen is one of these things which we don't try to bring into stories, but he just keeps coming up by screwing up investigations. If folks don't remember, he knowingly lied to a grand jury to secure the murder indictments against Alec Murdaugh, lying about blood spatter evidence. By the way, we reported on this wrongfully because SLED was pushing this narrative that they had blood spatter of Maggie and Paul on Alec's clothing, which was a lie. They knew it at the time, and they went to a grand jury with it. We, of course, also reported on Special Agent David Owen's talents as an investigator in the investigation of DJ Smith, where similarly huge lapses in what anybody who's seen like a single episode of Scooby-Doo would know to do to conduct an investigation. And unfortunately, that case will never go to trial, it seems, to put on court record his incompetence once more, because he did such a bad job that it was ruled that his death was accidental.
That one may surprise you because they do have an open civil case for wrongful death.
Yeah, right. We do hope that Tucker Player, who we've interviewed on this channel before, is able to bring enough information into the public record through that lawsuit to actually make law enforcement do something.
Right. And what I see continually in these investigations is just, not doing the legwork, like not interviewing all of the people they could interview. They had carte blanche permission from the Murdaughs to search the properties, yet they didn't get over to Alameda until August following the murders in June. That is the first place, that is where Alec Murdaugh said he went. Well, his story, his wife and son were being murdered, he was going to visit his mom. So if the theory is that he went there, they can't find the weapons and they don't search the property until August. They just gave him 2 months to dispose of all the evidence, the weapons, the clothing.
Oh, well, talk about Alameda. How about the big house, the main house on the property, the night of the murder? They don't secure that house. And then you have Blanca coming up in there and quite literally bleaching away the evidence in the shower, which could have proven if, say, Alec went up there and took a shower and, there was DNA in there, they could have used that to prove the crime. But instead of investigators taking over the night,
right,
they never took control of that property.
And that's what I continually see in these cases, and that bit them in the first trial. They ended up with a mistrial. Now they got to take this thing back in front of a jury. I don't know if they've done additional investigation. Maybe they went to the law office, talked to the people that they spoke to that day. Maybe they did do the forensic testing on that hose to determine if it's even possible, what he said happened, if that's even a possibility. I think this is the circumstances certainly warrant further investigation, but there was a very the couple was not happy. She was in treatment for depression, that is documented via court hearings. Do I think what happened made sense? No. Do I think that it's possible that he was involved? Yeah, absolutely. but they got to prove that in front of a jury, and they certainly did not do that the first time.
And our plans on coverage for this trial are for you to do daily live streams during the lunch breaks of this
Yes.
trial. So we've been corresponding with Court TV, who are going to be there providing television coverage, setting up their cameras, much the same as they did in the Murdoch trial. Um, they will be presumably providing a live feed throughout the day, and we're going to jump in, mainly Jennifer, at lunchtime and perhaps at other times if there's, obviously something important to address in a format just like this to provide our analysis throughout the second Colucci trial.
Yeah, I'm hoping to have some, legal experts on, including Lauren Taylor, who we've had on recently, to help give us some insight into what they're seeing. And, we'll be doing the live streams. If there's a key like opening and closing statements, we will, the whole team's actually going to be going down to Berkeley County for, the, key days of the trial. And then we'll be covering it in depth during the entirety of the trial.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that and seeing what kind of case the state brings all these years later, whether they're able to redeem themselves, because there's certainly a lot of suspicious circumstances surrounding this death.
Yeah, we do have one of the prosecutors is the same, but there is a new Kenley Abel, Aby. I probably butchered that. Is joining the prosecution team, and then Andy Savage is on the defense again with new co-defense.
Clearly, money can't be too much of a problem if Andy Savage has been retained twice, because he's certainly not a cheap date. Now, Jennifer, watching the first trial, what's your impression? Is it more of the investigators or the prosecutors who are responsible for some of the failings, which did not result in a conviction?
I mean, definitely team effort and failure. I definitely think there were lapses in the investigation that needed to be addressed. I think that the prosecution overestimated the testimony of key forensic witnesses, expert witnesses, and the impact that it would have on the jury. I think it was. I didn't think the prosecution did the best job. I'm probably gonna get smacked for that.
It's all right, Jennifer. We
I know.
get smacked all the time.
I know. I didn't think they did the greatest job, presenting the case to the jury, and I think they got blindsided by Andy Savage's questioning of the investigators.
Yeah,
He did a great
obviously,
job.
when the investigators, I kind of think of the prosecutors as like chefs, and then the
Mhm.
investigators are the folks who are buying the ingredients. So even a Michelin star chef is going to make you some pretty shoddy food if you give them a bunch of rotten vegetables. But it sounds like we might have had some poor ingredients and some poor cooking there. I obviously have not
Yeah.
watched nearly as much of this first trial as you have, so I'll take your word for that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely looking forward to watching it. I like to try to go into these cases with as little of a personal opinion as possible, just because I like to see the evidence as it comes. But I did want to kind of get a sense of, what went wrong that first time.
Yeah, it's kind of like going to a movie. I don't know about you, but if I know I intend to see a movie or TV show, I try to not watch the trailer or anything like that, because I
Right.
just want to go in cold and experience it that way. It's the same with trial coverage. Obviously, I want to familiarize myself with enough of the facts to not be out of my element when I get in there, but I really like coming into it with a somewhat fresh mind so that I can assess it from somewhat the same perspective as a juror.
And I definitely, I had not seen Andy Savage litigate a case. He did a great job, and I know he's gotten a lot of flack because he put his wife Cheryl was co-counsel with him, and he had her dress in the exact dress that Sarah Lynn had that night, heels, and he had her fit through that fence to see if it was possible for her to fit. It was a big question whether or not it was even possible for her to fit through that gap in the fence. And, he got a lot of flack for that, but I think it showed the jury the possibilities. And, if you've got a woman in a dress, you want to kind of see what's possible.
Well, and I think that if you're a defense attorney, you're not usually worried about taking flack if you can
Yeah, I know.
if you can get your client off of a murder charge,
Yeah.
which probably a lesser skilled attorney could not have.
Yeah, no, I was very, very impressed with his presentation of the defense. So yeah, I'm looking forward to. I know Lauren Taylor's been deep in this, so I am looking forward to talking to her as an attorney, getting her opinion on, what she saw from the first case and what she expects might change leading into the second case.
Yeah, I really value her insight. Obviously, she's been kind enough to sponsor FITSNews for years, even when I was just reading the website as a college
Yeah,
student and, early in my professional career before I worked here. I would always see her advertisements. So it's been really a pleasure to get to know her and to understand how much she knows about all these different areas of litigation, criminal and civil. So we always really appreciate when she provides her input.
yeah. So yeah, that's what we got coming up for May. I'm excited to.
And of course, I'm excited that this will drag your butt to South Carolina so we can hang out in person.
Yes, I will be there, ready to rock and roll.
I know I talk to you more than most people who actually live here.
I know. Same.
So there are a couple more stories kind of on the political side of things, which also, of course, walk into the true crime side. It seems to be an intersection that we frequently cover.
I get so sad when they intersect.
This kind of reminds me of Bowen Turner, and I don't want to, level these kind of allegations because the stuff that's been said about Turner is a lot more
Yeah.
serious than
Ooh.
this situation.
Yeah.
But Katherine Templeton, she's the former director of DHEC, our state's. It has multiple functions, and it's actually set to be broken up this summer. But under Nikki Haley, she ran that organization. It does health, environmental control. So right now, that's a pretty broad agency. But she was in charge of that. She's of course been linked in with GOP politics. You don't end up running a state agency without being politically well affiliated, and so she has launched a congressional bid against Nancy Mace down in the Lowcountry. Those unfamiliar with the national political scene should know that Nancy Mace is one of the Republican representatives to Congress in D.C. She has certainly had an interesting 2 terms in D.C. She worked for Donald Trump in 2016, worked on his campaign. And I think that definitely assisted in getting her some political allies when she ousted Joe Cunningham, who held that seat for 1 term. He flipped it blue. She flipped it back red. But after January 6th, she spoke out against Donald Trump. She like the day after January 6th, I want to say January 7th. And I don't remember exactly where I was listening to this statement. I was driving back to the Logan Airport in Boston, coming home from Christmas vacation where I was staying at my parents' house. And they played this statement on WBUR, the local NPR affiliate up there, of her going after Donald Trump. And I remember thinking, wow, she's got some balls and this is going to haunt her. And both of those things are definitely true. It launched a firestorm of, Trump world coming after her. And man, she took a beating on that. Trump endorsed a candidate, Katie Arrington, against her in her next election. She was able to defeat Katie Arrington. And Donald Trump, one thing folks should know about him is that even if he endorses you, if you lose, you are dead to him, because she has slowly worked her way back into Trump's orbit. In fact, when I covered Trump's rally in North Charleston prior to the Republican primary election down here, she was there. She was on the stage. She was pumping fists. And Trump, in his classic Trumpian fashion, Nancy Mace and I haven't always had the best relationship, but things are getting better. I don't know exactly what he said. It was something of that nature. Basically, I'm mending fences with Nancy, and members of his crowd some were booing, some were enthusiastic, but it certainly wasn't the response that Tim Scott got, which was like AC/DC walked out on stage or something. But Nancy is in hot water, not just with Trump world, with whom she's mending fences, but with the establishment, because she voted for the ouster of Kevin McCarthy, the former Speaker of the House. She aligned with Matt Gaetz, who is somebody who we're also going to be talking about later, who was the one who led that vote to oust Kevin McCarthy. Now, some say that this was a vote led because he reneged on promises he made to conservative members of the caucus to pursue certain conservative policy agendas. SC Nana says, great Trump impression. Thank you, SC Nana. Best Trump impression, #1 Trump impression. But he reneged on those promises. And so Gaetz led a small group, which Nancy Mace joined, which voted to oust him. And this was, I think, an even bigger foot in the hornet's nest than pissing off Donald Trump, because Donald Trump has a lot of enemies. Kevin McCarthy's got a lot of friends in high places. And so anybody who voted to oust Kevin McCarthy, there was, a price put on their head, and it was pretty much established that you would have a lot of money to run a campaign against any of these people who voted to oust McCarthy. And so that's where Templeton finds herself right now. She's somebody who, in her time working for Nikki Haley, was kind of seen by members of the political insiders here in South Carolina as an outsider. I had one political consultant, um, adding me on Twitter saying, calling her an establishment GOP pick is crazy because in 2012 she worked for Nikki Haley, an outsider. Well, that might have been true then, but I would say that when you take hundreds of thousands of dollars from the establishment to run a candidacy against somebody who bucks the establishment, you have successfully become a member of the establishment. Take all of this background for what it's worth, but I think it's important to understand the context here because her son has been accused of a couple of crimes. I mean, accused by the state of crimes. One was a pointing and presenting charge. This was the first time that he got into any trouble. From what I understand, this charge was dropped as it was a BB gun. Now, pointing and presenting is, of course, when you pull a firearm out in a setting in which you're not legally entitled to do so. So if it's not an actual gun, I don't think that charge applies. But I don't know the circumstances of the situation. Certainly, you're not getting a pointing and presenting charge for selling popcorn for the Boy Scouts. So, obviously something like this can happen in any of our lives. You can end up mixed up with the law and there's a misunderstanding or whatever. So something like this happens once, obviously we'll note it, but it's not like we're barking down Katherine Templeton's door. What's going on with your kid? Stupid stuff happens with teenagers all the time. But we've heard some other things which we are currently looking into on our own, which are not things that we can talk about publicly at this point in time, that we were looking into already. We were working with sources to verify information, which we hope to be able to publicize at some point in time in the future. When this assault charge, and this is a first degree, like a serious assault charge, came down, this is something that Team Templeton characterized as a high school fight. But the person, from what I understand, was injured. Like this was not just we have a disagreement and a scuffle and both go our separate ways. So when we saw this, coupled with the first charge, coupled with the stuff that we were looking at behind the scenes, which I'm not at liberty to discuss right now because it's not not corroborated enough for us to go public with, we took this quite seriously. And it should be noted that Templeton employs her son on her campaign. And from what we know from folks who know her, this has been a very difficult situation for her as a mother, for their family as a whole. And obviously, anytime that anybody's a parent dealing with a teenager who's running into trouble with the law or trouble at school, it's a terrible situation. But given what we know, it certainly could be a problem for her congressional campaign as well. Our founding editor, Will Folks, went so far as to invite her to drop out of the race to deal with these family issues. And as he said on our weekend review last week, politicians all the time drop out of races or relinquish offices saying, I got to spend more time with my family. And we all know, okay, that means that your wife caught you cheating on her or whatever the problem is that's not actually needing to spend time with your family. This one might actually be a serious circumstance like that. But we've gotten some interesting comments, which I'd like to read and react to. Over on Instagram, someone says, no chance Nancy can be beaten. She has done an amazing job stepping up. She's actually swinging back. Others in our state need to swing and cannot just soak a check. She might mean stroke. Nancy's public social life has been exemplary. Listen to her stories. You won't find others saying as loudly as she does. I think, this is just kind of a pure political comment, but I think Nancy's pretty polarizing. She's obviously good at getting in front of cameras. She's on the news more so than most freshmen or now sophomore Congress people that I've ever seen. I obviously, whether you agree with her brand of conservatism, is completely up to the listener, and that's not really our position here to tell you what to think. But as far as her electoral viability, I do think that she will be a pretty challenging candidate to beat, because if you're dissatisfied with the way that things are going, she has certainly been vocally opposed to the way that our current government is operating, both with the president himself, but also with members of the GOP who are more than willing to help the president advance pieces of his agenda, as we've seen happen over the last 2 weeks here with key votes on Ukraine, Israel, and FISA funding, all of which are things that uh, many conservative primary voters are not supportive of, but which have been advanced by leadership uh, in kind of the same situation which led to Matt Gaetz ousting Kevin McCarthy the first time. Now, getting into the more personal side, we had some comments that addressed that as well, and we pulled some kind of coming from both directions, which I like. Anyone who can't raise a son that can at least get second-degree assault and battery does not deserve our votes. That's just bad parenting. Jennifer, I know you're raising a son. You think if he caught an assault and battery charge, would it be a first degree or a second with your parenting style?
If you knew my kid, you'd know it would never happen.
Yeah, he's the nicest kid ever.
I know. It's more my daughter I'd worry about.
Really though? Yeah, she might just like stab somebody.
She's fierce.
Don't cross her.
As a mom, I see a lot. Like, I see both sides. I always see both sides of things. But as a mom, I hate to hold the actions of a child against a mother. So I would definitely need more information regarding, the outcome of that first charge. Why, what, was the outcome? Was she involved in the outcome? Did she pull strings to get a
That's
better
another thing. It
outcome?
obviously looks really bad when somebody who's very politically well connected's child has charges go
Yeah.
away. And I don't know, I will certainly be the first to level an allegation of an inappropriate thing happened if I see evidence of that. But you don't
Right.
hear me leveling that allegation because I haven't seen evidence
Have
of that.
not seen it yet.
What I've heard
but,
is that he had a
we
BB gun, and it was a charge that's not for people that are holding BB guns. So I
Yeah,
don't really
we
think
are
that.
we are seeking additional information to help make sure.
Of course, we always are.
Yeah, we do want to know. But in terms of whether or not she should step aside to take care of her son's issues, there's a lot of people in very important jobs that have children with mental health issues, with addiction issues, that manage to balance both. And I don't know, why. I read Will's article. I get it. She's in the public eye. But as a mother, does somebody think that I shouldn't do what I'm doing because my son has autism and needs additional help? Should I not be traveling to cover stories because, he's got autism, so you shouldn't do that. I mean, I don't know. Do I think she needs to focus on it? Yeah. How do I know she isn't already taking steps behind the scenes? I don't know what goes on behind
Well, now
doors.
to play the devil's advocate here, how many people has Henry, your son, beat the crap out of here in recent memory?
Just a sister, and she had it coming. I'm not gonna lie.
She had it coming on that instance. Okay. Yeah, well,
But yeah, no, I don't have kids with behavioral problems. I have kids with disabilities or special abilities, depending on how you phrase it. But I do have a child with challenges that I work through, but I do not have a child with disciplinary problems. And it's got to be hard for her in the public eye. I don't think there's any indication that she is going to step aside. So it'll be up to the voters to decide whether or not they feel that reflects poorly enough on her not to vote for her.
At the end of the day, I think a lot of folks who vote in primary elections are people who are more politically motivated than your
Yes.
general election voter. So I think
Yes.
that most of these people are going to be voting on whether or not they like Nancy Mace and what she's done in Washington, D.C.
Mhm.
And, I think that's to a certain extent a good thing because we're in an era right now of politics where we've accepted that the people who run for office and get elected to office are pretty much universally sociopaths. They're terrible people. I think most the the uh, the idea that our politicians are good people in the age of the modern media has just they can no longer work with the press corps who are willing to just lie. Like if you look back in the JFK era, everybody knew that he was having all sorts of floozies in the White House and nobody reported it. In today's day and age, you'd have some fool with an iPhone 13 with the 300x camera videotaping the floozy walking in the door, and it'll be
Yeah.
on Twitter.
Yeah.
So, no longer can these sociopathic people who feel compelled to tell everybody else how to live their lives and take their money involuntarily, no longer can they act like they're not the kinds of people which they are. So I think it has brought people to a place where they're just like, all right, I'm not going to like either of you. I'm not going to want either of you to spend a minute in my house, but I have to vote for one of you.
It's we are certainly being put into interesting position as voters.
Rebecca Barnes, and I said we have people from both perspectives here, so I want to read her comment. Says, in the words of Hannah Waddingham, oh my God, you'd never say that to a man, my friend. Do you think that Will folks would have called on whatever Mr. Templeton to drop out in the hypothetical instance that his son beat the schmutz out of somebody?
Knowing Will, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think that opinion goes for any parent. He's probably one of the least sexist people I've ever worked with. So no, yeah, I absolutely think he would have said that if it was Mr. Templeton. He's an equal opportunity giver of crap.
Yeah, Will certainly doesn't like when people. Look at the Turner case and the way we've covered that.
Yeah.
It's Mr. Turner who's the one who works for the solicitor's office, and I think that we've been pretty clear how we feel about that.
Yeah.
But I do understand, obviously it can be frustrating to folks who are supportive of gender equality that they see, people coming after Katherine Templeton in a way that they might not come after a male candidate. But I would say that a lot of people who voted in Republican primary elections still believe in men and women playing different gender roles. And I'm not here to tell you how you should feel about that. That's obviously, a personal choice, but it is an observation about Republican primary voters, which I think fair to make.
Here's my challenge: you get out and vote in those primary elections. I mean, they matter.
Yeah, if you live down in the Lowcountry, a pretty big swath of the beachy areas of the Lowcountry, that this is your race. So weigh in.
Yeah, get there, get to the polls.
Now, Matt Gaetz is still going to be a character in our next story, which takes us to the upstate. And Matt Gaetz was invited to campaign with Adam Morgan. This is another congressional race. This is Adam Morgan versus William Timmons. Timmons, of course, we've reported on what Will has titled the Days of Our
Congressman?
Days of Our Congressman, yes. Days of Our Congressman scandal. For folks who are unfamiliar with how this situation started, it is kind of a funny backstory because, there are like maybe a dozen political consultants in South Carolina. These are people who make their money being political operatives, working for candidates, helping them get elected. And obviously, if you work in the news media covering politics, you get to know these people because they are the ones with whom you interface on most occasions when dealing with candidates. And so we speak with them regularly. And Will was talking to one who represents a number of people in South Carolina. He's a very well-connected political professional. And oftentimes, through our network of sources, we hear things. And Will relayed to this person, look, we're hearing that William is involved in a sex scandal. And it's understood that at FITSNews, unless you're doing something which results in taxpayer money being wasted or some public concern, we're not going to report on your affair. Look, we know about people who are in the United States House of Representatives who are having affairs in the South Carolina delegation right now. We're not reporting on it. It's, there are other outlets that
don't use our money to do it.
Right. Don't bang a lobbyist and then vote for their bill. That's when we'll write about you. But that was not the situation here. He was banging a real estate developer's wife. But he decided to return to us with a statement, like a press statement about his infidelity. And then I don't know. This was a really dumb strategy because the next day he goes on conservative talk radio in the upstate and starts coming after us for printing it, which really, really pissed Will off because Will wasn't even looking for a statement. He wasn't trying to go down the road of printing the story. So for William to then give him one and then, bash him for running it the next day, it's like, what the heck, man? I was trying to do you a courtesy by giving you a heads up as to what's to come, and then you're hitting me. So this, of course, that Will's not a great person to do that to, especially when you live your life like William Timmons, where it's just a mess and you're a rich, entitled person who really probably has no business being on Capitol Hill other than the fact that people in previous generations worked their butt off to build an incredible business empire in the upstate. Because Will, wrote about all the ugliness of this infidelity. And it has certainly become an electoral issue because Timmons is nothing special on Capitol Hill, which has opened a lane for Adam Morgan, who is well connected in the upstate GOP, who is the former chair of the South Carolina Freedom Caucus, to launch an attempt to oust him from his seat in Congress. Now, I talk to people who are politically well connected here all the time in South Carolina. I don't know that people who are friends with Adam, people who are enemies with Adam, say he's got like 100% chance of taking him out, but he certainly has a fighting chance. And depending on who you ask, his recent endorsement and campaign stop with Matt Gaetz, the congressman who started the movement to oust the House Speaker, is either a plus or a minus. And I say this because some say that Matt Gaetz moved to oust the House Speaker because the Speaker was allowing an investigation by the House into alleged sexual, actually trafficking of a minor
Yeah, I was going to say
to
trafficking.
continue. Now, this I didn't really go down this road in my coverage of this because it was, like a pacer story, a short update story, basically just saying Matt Gaetz is going to be campaigning with Adam Morgan. But of course, we got a lot of comments about this, and this is a show that gives us the opportunity to dig into other aspects of stories which might not have made it to print, but which we think are something our audience might find interesting. So what I did was did a lot of reading on this situation with Matt Gaetz, with the case against him, so I could hopefully speak about it a little bit here.
And I did a little brush up reading. I did not do the depth reading, but I can keep up with you in the conversation.
God bless you for doing that, Jennifer. I know I asked you to read a couple of articles yesterday. I appreciate that you've done it. The situation is this. There's this tax collector in Florida who was elected, and like we elect our sheriffs here in South Carolina, at a municipal level, they elect tax collectors in Florida, which is very biblical. I like it. But this guy is a career criminal. This guy, like all of the white collar crimes, he seems to have just like taken a sampling of all the different ways that one can attract federal law enforcement to themselves. And so he ends up the center of this investigation. And they notice this guy is paying women who are potentially prostitutes to hang out with him. Oh, and here he is talking to Congressman Matt Gaetz. The two are known associates. The situation was that there was this woman whom he met on like adultconnections.com or one of these like, find a friend kind of websites, who misrepresented herself, said that she was 18. Now, I think 5 weeks later or something, that this gentleman who was Gaetz's friend at the time, shows you what kind of friends he keeps, but he was not aware that this lady is 17. So they fly her out wherever they're going, pay for the flight, and bam, you have a federal nexus right there. You are you're paying for a minor to have sex with you. And according to the federal law, it does not matter whether you know their age or not.
Does not.
So this guy gets the tax collector. The feds absolutely are just pounding this guy, and he agrees to cooperate in the investigation against Gaetz. He pleads to 6 out of like 33 charges. I think he's going to spend more than a decade in prison. or at least he was sentenced to more than a decade. With the 80%, he might actually spend less than that in prison. But they never end up pressing charges against Gates himself. All of that,
The Department of Justice did the investigation on that, right?
correct. This is
Yeah.
federal DOJ.
And they declined to press charges against Matt Gaetz.
Right. And that's largely because they didn't think that they had enough evidence to secure a conviction. Now, regardless of whether there's enough evidence to secure a criminal conviction, and I would argue that there's probably not, because there's no records of Gates paying this woman to have sex with him, and I don't even know that there's any records that she did have sex with him, and she's and all of the people who they had that might potentially testify have like perjured themselves on the record throughout the investigation. So obviously it would be pretty easy for a defense attorney to come in and dice up any testimony they might give as lies. Top that with the fact that the alleged victim is now OnlyFans in the sex industry, we could say, of her own volition. It's just not an easily prosecutable case. But let's return back to South Carolina, return back to Adam Morgan. This guy is a leader of the South Carolina Freedom Caucus, and he is also the operator of Majesty Music, which is a Christian music publication company. And he's a Bob Jones University alum, which is, of course, one of the most conservative Christian schools in the nation. So he's not exactly the kind of person that you would expect to be hanging out with a guy like Gates, who, regardless of the criminality of his actions, clearly the guy likes to have hedonistic pleasures. It certainly is an odd pairing, but politically, I think it actually makes sense because Gates, personality flaws aside, is kind of the standard bearer for these uber conservative, buck the establishment types. And by the way, the argument here is that Kevin McCarthy is allowing, being angry at Kevin McCarthy for allowing this investigation to proceed. Is I looked at the timeline here, and if I'm not wrong, the DOJ sends the letter to Gates. You're clear. We're not going to press charges against you. And that's basically when Kevin McCarthy, the leader of his own party, says, well, we're picking up where they left off in the House. So I can understand why when there are, Congress is basically full of crooks, liars, cheats, sexual criminals, just disgusting people. I can understand why when your own party's leader singles you out among the crowd of other disgusting people for the spotlight, why he could be mad about that, because it certainly was politically motivated. I mean, if you're looking for a criminal in Congress, you don't have to look far.
Yeah, I mean, it's exhausting. That's why I hate politics so much.
Yeah, and I don't blame you for it. I guess it's, some sort of masochistic urge that keeps me coming for more. But
yeah, I know. You're a
weirdo. All this to say, we'll see how this shakes out, whether this ends up being politically beneficial in the long run. But what we've heard from Camp Timmons is that, obviously the Timmons are independently wealthy. It's how Timmons is in Congress in the first place. And Morgan has certainly gotten a lot of grassroots support. We got video from a local GOP event where Morgan was getting the crowd fired up. And these are the people who really matter. These are the people who are attending local meetings. These are the people who go knock on doors for you. These are the people who will get their checkbooks out and write you checks. These are the people who will go tell their neighbors to vote for you. The party base. Morgan's got these people fired up. And then Timmons takes the stage.
He's not liked. You talk to people in the community up there, and these, people I talk to are, connected in the community, and he's not a likable person right now.
And that's why when he took the stage, people are literally booing him.
Yeah.
I mean, I was waiting for somebody to throw a rotten tomato at him. It was that bad. But the guy didn't get to where he is because he's a skilled politician who knows how to work a room, who knows how to work a crowd.
Right.
He basically ascended to the throne. So it's as if somebody becomes, a boxing champion holding a belt because the organization gave them that belt. Well, suddenly you've got a young, hungry boxer in the cage with you who's going to piece you up.
Right.
Now, maybe Timmons will be able to throw his weight around. And, Adam has some very powerful enemies because he's pissing off the same group of people that Nancy Mace is. So it remains to be seen. I would give Nancy a better chance of prevailing than I would Adam. But certainly we got a lot of incensed comments. Like one says, Will Folks promotes pedophiles on his site. Good thing he doesn't have any kids. Oops. One, obviously that's Matt Gaetz is not a pedophile in any like legal sense that we could go and publish that. So that's one thing. And certainly promoting Matt Gaetz is not really what we were doing with that post. Writing a news post saying person X is campaigning with person Y is far from supporting them, as is evidenced by the fact that on Will Folks' publication, we've just spent 20 minutes talking about Matt Gaetz's weird sexual rendezvous with a 17-year-old, which, while not illegal in the eyes of the Department of Justice, certainly aren't something that many upstanding citizens are doing.
Right.
So yeah, I wanted to address that, and that's kind of our last story that
Yeah,
we had teed up here for this month.
Our last segment, but I think our last couple of segments kind of gave readers and viewers idea of where we're going in May. We are going to be following the Adam Morgan stuff. See how
The two
Matt
are going to
Gaetz
have a
stuff.
debate
Yeah.
early. I think it might be next week. I need to look at my
Ooh.
calendar. But yeah, we're going to be at the debate. That's going to be really fun. There's going to be a surprise guest there who I don't know if he's announced his intent to be there, but we will be there with him, and it's going to be very fun. I'm looking forward to seeing that person.
Get all of the video. I'm actually, I don't like politics, but this was one I actually do enjoy following. And then, yeah, we will. We've got some articles coming out soon about more of the Colucci stuff, more detail, and we'll be giving some preview of our trial coverage along with.
Oh shoot!
a
Before we
landing
go,
page.
Mark Hubbard is saying any update on Rose Petal murder, and we didn't include
Oh.
that, but because I don't know, we didn't have any huge Rose Petal stories. But Jennifer, you got an update for Mark?
Well, yeah. So the trial of Zachary Hughes looks to be. We're anticipating for it to begin in either of September or October of this year. Recently, the case that the state had against John Mello for custodial interference relating to when he took his daughter to Italy while Christina was still alive, that was dismissed. They did a directed verdict in the middle, at the end of the trial, and the judge said the prosecution did not have enough evidence to proceed with that case. So that has been dismissed, and we're watching the harassment charges that were also filed against Mello and Hughes related to the nude images and the harassment of Christina Parcell prior to her death. So yeah, the murder trial, we expect it to be this fall. We will be doing full coverage of it. The story is, still as weird as it was. We're still watching.
It's getting weirder. It's only getting weirder. And John Mello routinely communicates with us through like pseudonym email addresses, which is a little bit, freaky knowing what he's alleged to have participated in. But I really want to interview John. I know that, there's some reticence to be in a room with him, but I really want to do it.
I think it would be fascinating to hear his point of view. I think it's absolutely a good idea, and you should do that. Yes, you should. You should interview him.
You're like, yes, you should.
I'm just saying, is all. Yeah, we have connected with John, and we would like as soon as we can get something scheduled in a neutral location. Dylan will be going.
I think Will should do it, but I'll do it if none of you guys have the stones to.
Well, I will.
Or are stupid enough to.
I'm just.
Will's just as dumb as me, though. So
yeah, just need to be safe, all. But no, I think it's as much as we can get everybody's perspective in a story, including John's. I think it's important, and we are working on that actively. So stay tuned for that.
I'd like to thank SC Nana, Stephanie. Y'all are saying some real nice things, and we hope that you make it a routine of tuning in because we're going to be doing this at the end of every month.
Yeah. And I'll be doing the live lunch times during the trial, the Colucci trial. So we'll have some of those, and y'all can ask questions then too.
If you'd like to follow Jennifer's Colucci updates, her Twitter handle or X now is IndieGen_. Look her up on there, give her a follow, and she'll be sure to be putting those links out on there so that you can follow them throughout the trial. Or, of course, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, and there's a little bell once you click the subscribe button, and that will send you like desktop notifications when we publish something new, or cell phone notifications if that's something you're interested in. Personally, that would annoy the heck out of me, but I appreciate that some of y'all might want to do that.
Oh, I get them for a lot of channels.
Yeah, well, you're psychotic. You have them on even when Will tweets. I mean,
Oh.
yeah, that's a lot. Anyways, thank you everybody for watching. Thank you for bearing with Jennifer and I as we try to fill the great vacuum that is left when our fearless leader Will is not around. We expect him to be back in the saddle full capacity very soon, and certainly we'll be back by the next time that we do this show.
Have a great day and a weekend. Great weekend.